carefully, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about fishing. It's about the moment when ordinary men just like you, accidentally brush against something they were never meant to see. Most people believe lakes are quiet places, calm water, peaceful silence, the kind of place you escape to when the noise of the world gets too loud. But that belief is a lie we tell ourselves, because water remembers things. Every river, every marsh, every forgotten reservoir carries secrets beneath the surface, things that sink, things that disappear, things that move when nobody is supposed to be watching. And sometimes the water gives those secrets back. Tonight, you're going to hear 3 stories, 3 men, 3 moments when a normal fishing trip turned into something darker, something wrong. But understand this before we go any further. The stories themselves aren't the most disturbing part. The disturbing part is what they reveal. Because if you pay attention, if you really listen, you'll notice something unsettling hiding in every detail. Patterns, behavior that doesn't make sense, movements that feel almost deliberate, like something beneath the surface was aware of them, aware of you. Men have always believed that when they step into nature, they are the hunters, the observers, the ones in control. But there are places, quiet, forgotten places, where that assumption flips, where the man holding the fishing rod isn't the one doing the watching. He's the one being watched. And sometimes the first sign that something is wrong is so subtle you almost ignore it. A ripple in the water, a shadow moving where no fish should be, a shape that rises slowly, too slowly, from the dark surface of a lake that should have been empty. The first man in this story didn't think much of it at first. Neither did his brother. They had been fishing that lake since they were kids. But that night, when something began rising out of the water on the far side of the lake, both of them felt something ancient triggered deep in their instincts. That quiet animal warning buried in every man's nervous system. The signal that whispers, "You shouldn't be here." But curiosity is a powerful thing, and curiosity is exactly how the wrong door gets opened. The lake sat deep inside a stretch of woods most people avoided. Not because it was dangerous, not because of any warning signs, but because getting there required effort. A long walk through uneven trails, thick trees swallowing the last bits of daylight, muddy paths that most casual fishermen didn't bother with. And that's exactly why the 2 brothers loved it. When you're young, seclusion feels like freedom. No crowds, no noise, just you, the water, and the quiet rhythm of casting a line into the fading light. They had been fishing there for years, bluegill mostly, sometimes bass. Nothing unusual ever happened, which is exactly why what happened that night felt so wrong. It was a Friday evening near the end of summer. The kind of evening where the sun bleeds slowly into the tree line and the lake turns into a sheet of black glass. Low-light fishing. Every fisherman knows that's when the water comes alive. So the brothers had packed their bait, grabbed their rods, and hiked the familiar path toward their favorite rock formation near the edge of the lake. They had done this hundreds of times. Same rocks, same quiet water, same slow rhythm of crickets chirping as darkness crept over the woods. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Lines cast, reels turning slowly, small fish tugging occasionally on the bait. Then something changed. It started with movement on the far side of the lake. At first, it looked like what any fisherman would assume, a large fish disturbing the surface, ripples expanding outward across the still water. But the ripples kept spreading, and they were too big, too controlled. One brother noticed first. He nudged the other and pointed across the water. Both of them squinted into the fading light. The lake was large enough that details were hard to make out. The last pieces of daylight were dissolving into dusk. But something was definitely moving. The ripples kept growing wider. Then something began rising from the water, slowly. Not the splash of a fish breaking the surface, not the sudden thrash of an animal. This was different, gradual, deliberate, like something standing up from beneath the lake itself. The first thought that hit their minds was simple, a huge fish. But the shape that emerged shattered that idea instantly, because the shape rising from the water wasn't horizontal, it was upright. And in that moment, both brothers felt the same chilling realization strike at exactly the same time. Whatever was in that lake wasn't a fish. It was a person. Now stop for a moment and picture the scene the way they experienced it. A secluded lake, night falling fast, no other fishermen for miles, and on the far side of the water, a human figure slowly rising straight up from beneath the surface. Think about how unnatural that really is. If someone jumps into a lake, you hear it. If someone swims, you see movement, splashes, ripples traveling across the water. But this person hadn't appeared suddenly. They had been under the surface long enough that the brothers never noticed them enter the water at all, which meant something even stranger. Whoever it was had already been submerged when the brothers arrived, possibly for a long time. The figure stood waist-deep in the water, swaying gently. Not thrashing, not gasping for air like someone who had just resurfaced after holding their breath, just swaying, slowly, back and forth. The movement almost looked rhythmic, hypnotic, like the water itself was guiding the motion. Both brothers stared in silence. Their fishing rods rested uselessly against the rocks beside them. Because once you see something that doesn't make sense, your brain does something strange. It stops processing the normal world, and instead it locks on to the anomaly, the thing that shouldn't exist. One brother whispered the obvious question, "Is that a person?" The other didn't answer, because they both already knew. Even from across the lake, the silhouette was unmistakably human. Arms, head, shoulders,
a body rising and falling gently with the water. And yet something about the movement felt wrong, too fluid, too controlled. It didn't look like someone struggling against cold water. It looked like someone perfectly comfortable inside it. The first brother tried to rationalize it. Maybe they're swimming. But the moment the thought formed, it collapsed under its own weight. Because anyone who has ever touched lake water after sunset knows something. That water gets cold, painfully cold, cold enough that even strong swimmers struggle after a few minutes. Yet this figure showed no discomfort at all. They simply floated there, swaying slowly, as if they had been part of the lake long before the brothers arrived. Minutes passed like that, silent, uneasy. Then the figure did something that sent a quiet chill down both of their spines. Without warning, it sank. Not diving, not splashing, just slowly lowering beneath the surface again. And within seconds, the lake looked empty. But one of the brothers had already pulled out his phone, and quietly he started a stopwatch.
The stopwatch started ticking. At first it felt like a joke. 3 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. Anyone who has ever tried to hold their breath underwater knows the truth. After about half a minute, your lungs start screaming for air. But the surface of the lake remained completely still. No bubbles, no splashes, no sign of movement. The brothers stared at the exact spot where the figure had disappeared. 40 seconds, 1 minute. The forest around them had grown quieter somehow. Crickets still chirped, but the sound now felt distant, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. The brother holding the phone muttered something under his breath. 1 minute 20. Still nothing. The other brother felt a strange tension building in his chest, the kind of tension you feel when your instincts are trying to tell you something, but your brain refuses to accept it. 1 minute and 40 seconds. Now it was getting ridiculous. Even trained divers rarely stay underwater that long without preparation. 2 minutes. The stopwatch numbers glowed faintly in the darkness. The brother watching the water felt a tight knot forming in his stomach, because something about the silence of the lake was starting to feel unnatural, not peaceful, expectant, like the lake itself was waiting. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Now even the brother with the stopwatch had stopped talking. His eyes were locked on the water. Both of them were leaning forward slightly, unconsciously. 3 minutes. That's when the ripples started again, but this time something was different. The ripples didn't appear on the far side of the lake where the figure had submerged. They appeared much closer, roughly a fifth of the distance across the water. And in that instant, the brothers realized something that made their stomachs drop. Whoever had been underwater hadn't just stayed beneath the surface. They had been moving, swimming under the lake for nearly 3 minutes, and now they were resurfacing again. The water broke open slowly. The dark shape rose upward once more, but now the brothers could see far more clearly. The figure wasn't some shadow anymore.
It was a person, and as the last strands of wet hair fell away from their face, both brothers felt their confusion twist into something even stranger, because the person in the water wasn't a man, it was a woman, young, long brown hair clinging to her shoulders, a dark green swimsuit, her skin pale against the black water. And as she floated there effortlessly in the freezing lake, she smiled at them. Not the awkward smile of someone embarrassed to be caught, not the friendly smile of someone greeting strangers. No, this smile was something else entirely. Calm, playful, almost inviting. And then she raised her voice across the water. "Hi."
That single word echoed across the lake like it didn't belong there. Hi. Simple, casual, almost cheerful. But nothing about the situation was normal enough to make that greeting feel harmless. The brothers just stared. Because when your brain is confronted with something that defies expectation, it hesitates, it stalls, it searches desperately for the most comfortable explanation. Maybe she had been swimming. Maybe she lived nearby. Maybe she was just one of those people who liked cold water. The mind will twist itself into knots, trying to avoid the truth that something doesn't make sense. The woman floated in the lake like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her shoulders barely moved with the water, her posture relaxed, comfortable, too comfortable. One of the brothers finally found his voice. "What are you doing out there?" The question came out more bluntly than he intended, but the woman didn't seem offended. Instead, she leaned her head back slightly and laughed. "I'm swimming." The answer hung in the air. Technically correct, completely absurd, because any man with half a brain could tell that lake water at night wasn't just cold, it was brutal. The other brother leaned down and dipped his hand into the water. He pulled it back instantly, ice cold, the kind of cold that bites straight into the bones. He looked back across the lake with a deepening sense of unease. "You're swimming in that?" The woman's smile widened. She shrugged lazily. "You get used to it." Then something changed. Her body shifted, and she began gliding closer to them. Not splashing, not kicking aggressively like someone swimming across open water, just moving, smoothly, effortlessly. The distance between them slowly started shrinking. Both brothers felt that quiet alarm in their chest again, the one that whispers something isn't right. The brother holding the fishing rod tried to laugh it off. "You training for something or what?" She tilted her head. "Something like that." Another slow stroke forward, closer now. The water around her barely reacted to her movement, like she belonged inside it. Then she asked the question that froze both brothers in place. "Do you want to join me?" For a moment, neither of them spoke, because on the surface, the invitation sounded harmless. Two teenagers, a lake, a girl swimming at night. But something about her tone, something about the way she looked at them, made the offer feel less like an invitation and more like a test. And deep down, somewhere beneath the confusion and curiosity, both brothers felt the same quiet realization forming. If they stepped into that water, something very bad might happen. The older brother spoke first. "No, The water's freezing." He tried to say it casually, like the idea was just mildly ridiculous, but his voice carried an edge of tension he couldn't quite hide. The girl in the lake didn't look disappointed. She didn't look embarrassed either. Instead, she watched them, carefully. Her finger touched her lip as if she were thinking. The lake was silent again, except for the slow lapping of water against the rocks. Then she laughed, not loudly, just a soft, amused sound. "You'd get used to it." She drifted a little closer. Now the brothers could see her face clearly in the fading light, and something about that face made the back of the older brother's neck tighten. She was beautiful, that was the strange part. Not unsettling looking, not creepy in any obvious way, just a young woman with sharp eyes and long wet hair clinging to her shoulders. But there was something else behind her expression, something cold, something calculating, like she was studying them the same way a fisherman studies the water when waiting for a bite. The younger brother shifted uncomfortably. He whispered quietly to his sibling, "We should probably go." The words came out instinctively, like his body had made the decision before his brain had time to debate it. The older brother nodded slowly. He stood up and started gathering their fishing gear, the rods, the tackle box, the small cooler they'd brought with them. He didn't look back at the lake right away, because part of him already knew she was still watching. Finally he turned. "Yeah, we're heading out." He tried to keep his tone friendly, polite, the kind of tone you use when you want to end an awkward conversation with a stranger. For half a second, the girl said nothing. She just stared, and in that moment, the smile slowly disappeared from her face, not fading naturally, dropping like a mask being removed. Her eyes darkened, her head tilted slightly. "You're leaving?" The question sounded simple, but something in the way she said it carried an unsettling weight. The older brother forced a quick laugh. "Yeah, getting late." For a few seconds there was nothing but silence. Then suddenly she screamed, not a startled scream, not the frightened scream of someone in danger. This was something else entirely, a furious, piercing shriek that ripped across the lake and echoed through the trees. "No!" The sound was so violent that both brothers jumped backward in shock. The girl's face twisted with rage, and before either of them could react, she started screaming again. But this time, she wasn't using words, just raw, animals shrieking, high-pitched, unhinged, the kind of sound that triggers something ancient inside a man's spine. The signal that danger is no longer theoretical, the signal that tells your body one thing: run. And that's exactly what they did. The first instinct wasn't courage, it was survival. The older brother grabbed the tackle box and slung it under his arm. The younger snatched the fishing rods, nearly dropping one as his hands shook. Neither of them said another word, because when a sound like that rips through the night, words become useless. They ran, not the slow jog of guys leaving an awkward situation. They ran the way animals run when something in the forest suddenly stops feeling safe. Behind them, the girl kept screaming.
At first it sounded like words, "Come back!" but the words quickly dissolved into something worse. Shrieking, high, tearing screams that didn't sound human anymore. The younger brother glanced back once as they pushed through the narrow trail leading away from the lake. That was a mistake, because the last thing he saw before turning away was the surface of the lake exploding with movement, water splashing violently, as if the girl had started swimming toward the shore, fast. The image burned into his mind instantly, not because he could see her clearly, but because the splashes were moving in the direction of the rocks where they had been sitting just seconds earlier. He turned forward again and ran harder. Branches snapped under their shoes, leaves scraped against their arms as they pushed deeper into the woods. The screams followed them, echoing through the trees, louder than they should have been, too loud for someone who had just been floating peacefully moments before. Halfway down the trail, the older brother felt a cold spike of fear shoot through his chest. What if she came out of the water? What if she followed them? He dared not turn around to check, because sometimes your brain already knows the answer, and it's better not to confirm it. They kept running. 30 seconds, a minute. The trail curved toward the dirt clearing where their car was parked. The screams were still echoing faintly behind them, not getting closer, but not stopping either. By the time they burst into the clearing, both brothers were breathing hard. The younger one yanked open the passenger door, while the other fumbled for the keys. His hands were shaking badly now. The engine finally roared to life. They slammed the doors shut. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just sat there, listening. The forest outside the car had fallen completely silent. The screaming had stopped. The older brother forced himself to look toward the trail leading back to the lake. Nothing moved. No figure stepping out of the woods. No wet footprints. Just darkness swallowing the path. The younger brother pulled out his phone. He dialed the police. His voice cracked as he tried to explain what they had seen. A girl in the lake, screaming, acting insane. The dispatcher told them officers would come investigate and asked them to stay nearby to answer questions. The brothers looked at each other. Then the older one shook his head. No. He hung up the phone, because every instinct in his body was screaming something far louder than reason. Get away from that lake. And so they drove, fast, leaving behind the dark water and whatever it had been waiting inside it.
For a long time, neither brother spoke. The car headlights cut through the empty country road as the lake disappeared behind them. Trees passed like dark walls on either side of the asphalt, and inside the car the silence felt heavy. Not the comfortable silence between people who understand each other. The kind of silence that follows something neither of you knows how to explain. Finally, the younger brother broke it. What was that? The older one kept his eyes on the road. He wanted to say the obvious thing, that she was just some strange girl, maybe mentally unstable, maybe someone who liked swimming at night. But every version of that explanation collapsed the moment he replayed the memory in his head. 3 minutes underwater, swimming across a freezing lake without a sound, floating effortlessly in water that felt like ice, then screaming like a wounded animal the moment they tried to leave.
No normal explanation fit all the pieces. But the human mind hates uncertainty, so eventually it settles for the least frightening story available. "Probably just some crazy girl," the older brother muttered. The younger one didn't answer, because deep down he didn't believe that. They reached home eventually, and like most strange experiences in life, time began doing what time always does. It softened the edges. Days passed, then weeks. The brothers kept fishing, just not at that lake, at least for a while. But curiosity has a strange way of creeping back into a man's mind, because once you encounter something mysterious, part of you wants to see it again, not out of stupidity, out of a primal drive to understand. Eventually, they returned to the lake, but this time they didn't go alone. They brought their father. At first, he didn't believe their story. Two teenage boys claiming a girl rose from the lake like some ghost. But their fear had been real enough that he agreed to come along and see the place for himself. They fished there many times after that, daytime, evening, sometimes late into the night. And you know what? They never saw her again. No figure in the water, no strange ripples, no screaming echoing through the woods, just a quiet lake like it had always been. Over time, the story turned into something else, a weird memory, a strange thing that happened once, something they joked about sometimes. But years later, when the older brother thought back on that night, one detail always crawled back into his mind, a detail that made the whole thing feel less like random insanity and more like something deliberate. Because when she first appeared in the water, she hadn't looked surprised to see them. She hadn't acted embarrassed. She hadn't asked what they were doing there. She had simply smiled, as if she had been waiting for them. And that realization leads to a darker question most men don't want to ask. If something waits long enough in the water, eventually someone will come fishing. And that night, two curious brothers almost became the catch. But that lake wasn't the only place where something beneath the water reached out to a fisherman, because the second story didn't happen in a quiet lake. It happened deep inside the marshlands of Louisiana. And what grabbed that man's ankle was still down there when they escaped.
If you've never been inside a marsh at dawn, you might imagine it as peaceful. Still water, mist drifting across the reeds, the slow rhythm of paddles dipping into dark water. But marshlands are not peaceful places. They are ancient, half land, half water, a maze of mud, tangled roots, and hidden channels that swallow sound and distort distance. In a marsh, the ground itself can't be trusted. One step might land on firm soil, the next sinks into bottomless muck. And beneath that water lives a world most men never see. Catfish the size of dogs, alligator gar with prehistoric jaws, snapping turtles older than some towns. But even men who grow up fishing marshlands will tell you something strange. Sometimes something touches your leg under the water, something that doesn't behave like any fish.
Most fishermen ignore that thought, because if you let your imagination wander too far in a place like that, you'll never step into the water again. The second man in this story had spent years fishing the Louisiana marshes. His name was Jay. For him, fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was peace. The kind of peace that men chase after a long week of work, noise, and responsibility. So when early spring rolled around, Jay did what he always did. He called his friend Angel. The two of them had fished together for years, same routine every time. Load up the gear, grab a couple beers, paddle deep into the marsh where other fishermen rarely bothered to go. That morning felt perfect. Cool air, gray clouds drifting slowly across the sky. The marsh stretching endlessly around them like a quiet kingdom of water and reeds. They paddled their two-person kayak through narrow channels for nearly 30 minutes before finding the perfect spot. The water was shallow, maybe 4 feet deep, perfect territory for speckled trout. They anchored the kayak loosely between two clusters of reeds and started casting their lines. The world around them was silent. No other boats, no engines, no voices, just the occasional splash of fish somewhere beneath the surface. Time passed easily, the way it does when men are doing something simple and familiar. Then Angel hooked something, not huge, but decent enough that his rod bent sharply as the line tightened. "Got one?" he grinned. Jay leaned forward to watch, and that's when something small and completely ordinary started the chain of events that neither man would ever forget. Angel leaned too far over the side of the kayak, and his phone slipped out of his jacket pocket. They both watched it fall, straight into the murky marsh water, gone in seconds. What happened next seemed harmless, at least at first, but sometimes the smallest mistake leads a man directly into the hands of something waiting beneath the water.
Angel stared down at the water where his phone had vanished. The marsh surface looked exactly the same as it had seconds before. Brown, cloudy, still, like the water had simply swallowed the device without a trace. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Angel muttered a string of curses under his breath. The phone wasn't just a phone, it was expensive, and the kind of expensive that hits hard when you're not exactly swimming in extra cash. "Insurance won't cover it if it's lost," Angel said, frustration tightening his voice. Jay nodded slowly. He understood that pain. Losing a phone wasn't just annoying. It could mean hundreds of dollars, money most people didn't want to spend replacing something that should still exist. So they did what most stubborn men would do. They tried to find it. The problem was the water. Marsh water isn't like a lake. It isn't clear. It's thick, full of silt, mud, and tangled vegetation that turns every inch below the surface into a blind search. You can't see anything. So for the next 20 minutes, the two of them used their paddles to sweep slowly along the marsh bottom, feeling around, poking gently through the muck. But every inch felt the same. Soft mud, slimy weeds, nothing solid enough to be a phone. Eventually, Jay leaned back with a tired sigh. "Man, it's gone." Angel didn't respond. He just stared into the water, thinking. Then he started taking off his shoes. Jay raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?"
Angel pulled off his pants next. "I'm getting it." Jay hesitated. At first, the idea didn't sound terrible. If the phone had only fallen a few feet from the kayak, feeling around with bare feet might actually work better than using paddles. Still, something about stepping into marsh water always feels wrong. There's a reason fishermen prefer boats. Because the moment your body enters the water, you're no longer the observer. You're part of the environment. Angel slid carefully off the kayak and into the marsh. The water reached his waist instantly, and the cold hit him like a punch. "Jesus!" he gasped. Jay laughed lightly from the kayak. "Told you?" But Angel ignored him. He started moving his feet slowly across the muddy bottom, searching carefully, step by step, feeling through the muck. Jay watched from the kayak, leaning back casually. At first it was almost funny, Angel muttering complaints about the cold, trying to keep his balance in the soft mud. But after a few minutes, something changed. Angel stopped talking. He stood still, his body stiff. Jay noticed it immediately. "You feel it?" Angel didn't answer. Instead, he shifted his weight, slowly moving one foot again. Then suddenly, Angel screamed, and in the same instant, his entire body jerked violently forward, as if something beneath the water had grabbed him and yanked him down.
1 second, Angel was standing in the marsh. The next second, he was gone. Jay barely had time to react before Angel's entire body disappeared beneath the surface with a violent splash. The water exploded upward, muddy and dark, then settled again almost instantly. Silence. Jay's brain froze. At first, he assumed the obvious. Angel must have slipped. The marsh bottom was soft and uneven, and losing your footing out there wasn't uncommon. But 5 seconds passed, and Angel didn't come back up. Jay leaned forward in the kayak. Angel? Nothing. The marsh water rippled slightly where he had gone under. 10 seconds. Still nothing. Now something cold crept into Jay's chest. Angel was a strong swimmer. Even if he slipped, he should have surfaced immediately. Jay kicked off his own shoes in panic, ready to jump in after him. "Angel!" The water suddenly erupted. Angel burst out of the marsh like something had thrown him upward. He gasped violently, coughing and spitting muddy water everywhere. His entire body was coated in thick black muck. His eyes were wide, wild, terrified. "Go!" he screamed. Jay grabbed his arm and hauled him back into the kayak. "What happened?" Angel didn't answer right away. He just kept staring back at the water, like he expected something to rise up behind them. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking, and whatever had happened beneath that water had shaken him deeper than simple panic. Finally he spoke. Something had grabbed him. Not brushed his leg, not bumped him, grabbed him, wrapped around his ankle and pulled him under. And the way Angel described the grip made Jay's stomach twist, because he said it didn't feel like a fish, not teeth, not a bite, not even a tail. It felt like something holding him, something strong, something alive, something that had tried to drag him deeper into the marsh. Jay didn't argue. He didn't laugh. He didn't offer the usual explanations men give each other to make fear sound stupid. Because when he looked at Angel's face, he knew the reaction was real.
Angel wasn't the kind of guy who panicked easily, but now his hands trembled as he grabbed the paddle. "Just go," Angel muttered. Jay didn't need convincing. The kayak cut through the marsh water quickly as they paddled away from that spot. Neither of them looked back for the first minute. The only sound was the splash of their paddles and Angel's uneven breathing. Finally, Jay risked a glance behind them. The water looked normal again, flat, empty, nothing moving. But something about that quiet surface made his skin crawl. After they reached a wider channel, Jay slowed the kayak. "What exactly grabbed you?" Angel stared down at his ankle. Mud still dripped from his leg. "It wrapped around me," he said quietly. Jay frowned. "A fish?" Angel shook his head immediately. "No." The answer came too fast, too certain. Jay tried to think of anything that made sense. A gar, a big catfish, maybe even a snapping turtle, but Angel kept shaking his head. "It wasn't teeth," he insisted. "It wasn't biting me." Jay felt the unease growing now. "Then what was it?" Angel swallowed slowly. "I don't know." His voice dropped lower. "But whatever it was pulling me away." Jay didn't like the way that sounded. Pulling, not thrashing, not attacking. Pulling, like something trying to drag prey somewhere deeper, somewhere hidden beneath the mud and roots of the marsh. They didn't fish anymore that day. The trip ended right there. The kayak moved steadily back toward the boat launch, both men quiet now. Jay kept thinking about the moment Angel disappeared beneath the water, the speed of it, the force, and the fact that Angel had been standing in only 4 feet of water. That meant whatever grabbed him had been on the bottom, waiting. Angel barely spoke during the ride back. He kept glancing at the marsh behind them, like he expected something to follow. When they finally reached land, he stepped out of the kayak slowly. Jay noticed the bruise forming around Angel's ankle, dark, circular, not teeth marks, not scratches, just a tight band of pressure, like something had squeezed him hard. Jay tried one last time to make sense of it. "Could have been a big fish," he suggested. Angel looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You didn't feel it." Jay didn't respond, because that was true. Angel had felt it. Angel had been under the water, and the fear in his eyes said something Jay couldn't explain away. Whatever had grabbed him didn't behave like an animal. That was months ago. Angel never got his phone back. Neither of them ever returned to that exact spot in the marsh again. But sometimes Jay still thinks about it, about the way Angel described the grip, the way it pulled, and the way the marsh water closed over him like a mouth. Because fishermen like to believe they understand the water. They study fish, currents, weather. But marshlands are old places, places where things sink, where things hide, and sometimes where something beneath the surface realizes a man has stepped into the water and decides not to let him leave.